With breaking news, amid the crisis between the United States and the leaders of Iran, and with the president still unclear about how to respond to Iran's recent attack on Saudi Arabia, President Trump is now under siege and taking fire from the rear from his recently fired third national security advisor, John Bolton. Bolton ripped the president's foreign policy at noon today on practically every front. The news was first reported by Politico. An attendee confirmed the account to NBC News. Bolton, who was attending a luncheon for a conservative think tank with high-profile Republican figures, criticized the president's willingness to negotiate with the Taliban at Camp David and said it sent a terrible signal. He also added that it was disrespectful to the victims of 9/11 because the Taliban harbored al-Qaeda. Additionally, Bolton said that any negotiations with either North Korea or Iran were doomed to failure, and that there was no signs either country was serious about giving up its nuclear program. NBC News reached out to Bolton and his representatives for comment but have not heard back. Just moments ago, in fact, President Trump was asked about Bolton's attack.
That's better than somebody that goes around and saying we want to use the Libyan model. He said the Libyan model. That set us back very badly when he said that. So I think John really should take a look at how badly they've done in the past, and maybe a new method would be very good. Now, with all of that being said, maybe a very powerful attack. Guys like Bolton and others wanted to go into Iraq, and that didn't work out too well. All right, that didn't work out too well. That was a horrible idea. It was, and I put him in anyway. And frankly, everybody knows if you move wrong, he wants to, he doesn't realize that you get stuck. You get stuck. And they got stuck, and I'm unsticking it.
Wow, that's pretty profound. Bolton's attack came in the midst of an international crisis, of course, where President Trump is trying to cobble together a cohesive response to the recent attacks by Iran on those two major Saudi oil fields. The critical comments came on the same day that President Trump announced Bolton's replacement. Trump selected Robert O'Brien, currently serving as the State Department's chief hostage negotiator, as his fourth national security advisor in just 3 years. From where I'm joined by Vivian Salama, White House reporter at the Wall Street Journal, Jeremy Batch, former chief of staff at the CIA and the Department of Defense, and Charlie Sykes, editor-in-chief of the Bulwark. Charlie, this really rips the scab off the whole fight. There he is taking a shot just now, a few moments ago, at the guy he made his national security advisor for taking us into Iraq, saying that got us stuck there. He doesn't want to get stuck. He doesn't want to follow the advice of the neocons like Bolton. But there they are, fighting it away, person to person, mano a mano, at the very time he's got to be focused on what do we do with the Ayatollah and Rouhani over there in Iran.
I was actually struck by how mild the president's comments were. I mean, given the way he's ripped some of his critics in the past, that was pretty restrained for Donald Trump. But, John Bolton obviously is not going to go quietly. And I think it was very interesting where he delivered the remarks and what he said. He was introduced to that luncheon by Rebecca Mercer, who is one of the most important donors on the right in conservative Republican causes. It's a very high-powered group. So there's no question about it. John Bolton still has a constituency for his approach to foreign policy. And again, the problem here is not whether or not Donald Trump is going to be too hawkish or too dovish. It's whether he's going to be too erratic, whether he's going to blunder into this and send mixed signals that'll lead to miscalculations.
Vivian, it seems to me, went to New York City, the media capital of the world. If you want to make noise, if you want to get your word out, you do it at lunch in New York. And he did it with all those bold print names in the room on the right. He wants the president to hear this, John Bolton. He wants this war.
100%. And exactly like what Charlie said, is that it's really not what he said, because we've known that he was sparring with the president over the Taliban coming to the United States and talking to them in general over Iran and a number of other issues. He felt like the North Korea talks were probably doomed from the start. But it's the crowd that he was speaking to. You go out there and you try to basically create a schism within the Republican Party as to the view, the foreign policy view. The president obviously taking a more conciliatory approach to things like Russia. With Iran, he's saying he was willing to talk to them. And North Korea just being the fact that we've had 3 summits with the North Koreans. This is all for a number of the more traditional Republicans a very, very unsettling thing. And so John Bolton trying to reach out to some of those folks and say, listen, this is what we are working with, and you make the decision.
Now, here's the president of the United States. He's our commander-in-chief. He sets the world order, basically. What's he going to do now? He dumped this guy, John Bolton. He's gone. He's trashed in the trash can. He hires a new guy today. At the same time, he's got to make a big decision. How do we whack back at Iran without starting a war, which he doesn't want?
I don't think he's going to respond militarily to the attack on Saudi Arabia. He didn't respond in June to the shot that Iran took downing an American aircraft, which, by the way, Chris, was the first time an American aircraft was downed by an adversary nation in international airspace since the Korean War. We didn't respond then. This was not an attack on the United States. This was an attack on another country. They can respond if they so choose, and Pompeo and others can give them rhetorical support. It was an act of war against them, not us.
Why Pompeo say it was an act of war? He meant an act of war against Saudi?
Against Saudi Arabia, absolutely. He wants to signal that this was serious, this was unprecedented, this was definitively Iran, which, by the way, is all accurate. But he also wants to signal this doesn't mean, per se, that the United States is going to respond militarily.
You know, Charlie, this is sort of what I hate to use Latin aid terms, but it is one of those inflection points. And it's, are we going to go back to what W did and Cheney and the whole crowd, and Liz Cheney still wants to do, keep fighting, looking for wars we can start in the Middle East? Or are we going to try to find some other approach to getting stuck, as Trump said a few moments ago? I don't think the American people want to get stuck again. We're stuck in Afghanistan. We're still stuck a bit in Iraq. It's easier to go in than it is to come out. I think we learned that over the last 30, 40 years. Your thoughts?
Well, we haven't, but this is also where it's very important for the President of the United States to have credibility and to have reliable allies, neither of which this president has done a very good job cultivating here. You know, this is the moment where if you want to avoid war, you need to have maximum pressure on this regime, and you need to have a credible diplomatic offensive against the Iranians who are going to keep testing him until there's some sort of a response. But the problem is, you know, has Donald Trump assembled that kind of a coalition alliance?
You're answering your own question. Charlie, you just answered the question.
And then, of course,
he doesn't
credibility.
have allies in the world.
Credibility.
He got Netanyahu as a potential ally, and he may be gone in a week. Right. I don't know who his friends are, this president. I hope we have long-lasting friends, but we've been butchering those relationships. I agree with you. You don't do sanctions without allies. You can't just sanction a country. You need a lot of allies to do it. Your thoughts? How do you do it at this point? How do we go after Iran right now? Big question.
Well, again, this is the problem that he has. He needs to be believable. He needs to be credible. When he makes a threat, he needs to follow through on it. I think a lot of the world is looking at Donald Trump and thinking, we got this guy. We understand how he bluffs, and therefore we can keep testing him. The one thing Donald Trump, the real danger here is that Donald Trump does not want to appear to be weak. He does not want to appear to be backing down, which could lead to the kind of miscalculation that leads to war.
Well, Pompeo's tough message on Iran was echoed on Capitol Hill today by Senator Lindsey Graham. Let's listen to him in his unusual break with Trump.
This attack on the oil refinery, by any reasonable definition, is an act of war. It is attacking the world economy. It's the stability of the oil markets throughout the world.
Well, on the opposite end of the spectrum, Wyoming Congresswoman Liz Cheney, the daughter of the former vice president, went even further in the right-wing direction, telling reporters that the United States should consider a proportional military response. Oh, this is Dick Cheney back again. Let's go to war again against Iran. Utah Senator Mitt Romney, on the other hand, while agreeing that Iran was responsible, doesn't see the United States has to respond at all. This is the Republican Party peeking its head up, the real Republican Party. Mitt Romney, here he is.
This is up to Saudi Arabia. We've been selling them weapons over the years so that they're able to defend themselves. But we're not the policemen of the world. And if Iran attacks Saudi Arabia should be the nation that decides exactly how they're going to respond.
Jeremy, sometimes that guy talks like president, and I like it. I mean, restraint, intelligence, smart use of our power, not proportional response. Somebody shoots a spitball, we don't shoot it back.
That's right. And Robert O'Brien, the new national security advisor, actually advised Mitt Romney. And I think O'Brien.
He did before.
Yes, he did. And I think O'Brien really comes from that more traditional Republican mold. Yes, hawkish on some issues, muscular internationalism, if you will. That's the way they would characterize it.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.